So I was a judge in the BookTube Prize this year. I mentioned it in the earlier part of the year, January, February, March-ish, because that's when I was reading the books for it. I did the first round. I didn't do the second round because I was moving at that time. And then I didn't end up judging any more rounds because I just wasn't reading. As I've talked many times in many videos on here, that my reading has just not been back where it was prior to me moving. I was just looking back, so I have a notebook. It's I guess my book journal, or my reading journal, and I was looking back at, just in, I think January, I read 16 books, and then it went downhill from there. For whatever reason, various reasons, enjoying other things, just not focusing on reading, not finding things that I'm enjoying. Books taking me a lot longer to read than I would expect them to. But anyway, I did read for the first round of the BookTube Prize, the nonfiction category, and I realized that I had never, I'd never wrapped those books up for you. I didn't want to before the BookTube Prize finals, or the winners were announced, just in case another judge saw it. Didn't want to influence anything. When I was looking to see kind of what I wanted to do for my, favorite nonfiction of the year, I remembered I need to tell y'all about the ones that I read for this. So I don't have any of them. I'm going to put pictures up. So the first one I read was The Siege by Ben McIntyre. I got this from the library, and I think I also listened to it on audio, perhaps. I think I did. This is about a hostage situation, and I'm reading my notes. Thankfully, I took some. About a hostage situation in the Iranian embassy in London. 6 Arabs took the embassy and some of the staff members and visitors hostage. I really liked the way the book was written. It felt like a fiction book, a fast-paced fiction book, and I didn't know anything about the situation or the history, and it was from what I read of it and then looked into some of the history of it, it was presented really well. In fact, I liked the writer so much that I did get another of his books. But McIntyre really explored the political road, the map, and how we got there, like where it was at that time, the geography and the politics, and then how that influenced kind of movements afterwards. And then it showed also the perspective of the Arab men that were labeled terrorists, and kind of why they were doing what they were doing. And in the book, there's some empathy shared between the hostages themselves and the hostage takers. So that was interesting perspective as well. It also showed a lot of what was going behind the scenes with the London authorities and how they were trying to end the situation. This is not a spoiler. It's just a random fact that was in the book that one of the princes wanted to go down. Like, people wanted to be present and observe this situation like it was a TV show or something like that, or a play going on live. So it was really interesting. It was really interesting. I ended up giving that 4 stars. The next one I read was Byron. I think it's called My Life in Letters by Andrew Stouffer. I listened to this on audiobook, and the author took kind of 10 letters that were written by Byron and kind of tells the story of what's going on in Byron's life when he wrote the letters. It looks kind of at Byron's relationships that he had with different people in his life. It did talk a bit about his writing kind of in the context of what was going on in his life, like what may have influenced certain parts of his work. And it also talked about his health, his finances, drug use, romantic and intimate relationships. That was interesting. Like, I always knew, I had a professor in undergrad, which I majored in English, who was big into Byron. And I knew some of his extracurriculars, and this just kind of expanded on what I knew. So my notes on the book, I gave it 3 stars. My notes on the book are that it could have used some better editing and kind of rushed through the last part of his life. They spent a lot of time on the letters, or I felt they spent a lot of time on the early letters and the early parts of his life, and then kind of rushed through the last parts, which were kind of the times of him with health issues, finance issues, and just kind of life falling apart situation. So yeah, that was Byron. So then I read The Rebels Clinic by Adam Schatz. This was following the career of Franz Fanon, who was a Black psychiatrist who was from Martinique and fought with the French, and then worked for independence for Algeria. One part of this story that I thought was very interesting in relating to what I do and what I've done in my career in psychology is that, and forgive me, I can't remember who the mentor was that Fanon learned this under, that psychiatric hospitals were not really set up to foster healing. They seem to be more set up for treatment and in typical sterile hospital setting. However, with the nature of psychiatric disorders, that having a more interactive environment in which to try to heal and get treatment worked better. And so community connections, groups, gardens, like community rooms where they could play games or watch TV as well, and making those connections with some of the other patients. Fanon saw that through one of the mentors that he worked with, and then created that as well in one of the psychiatric hospitals he worked in. I did think that it was very well researched, very well done from that perspective of getting all the facts about Fanon's life in order and the influences on his life and kind of some of the fractures that happened between the different leaders or political thinkers that were trying to get independence for some of the colonies, specifically for Fanon was Algeria. Yeah, I thought all that was really well done. It did feel really academic. So I could see someone wanting to look specifically and know more about Fanon and his life and his work. That's the book to go to. In the beginning, it was really interesting. It felt like a narrative. It felt like a creative nonfiction about Fanon, based on the facts, but also telling it in a story-like way. And then towards the end, it ended up feeling more like just a list of facts. So that was kind of a disappointment in that sense. I ended up giving it 3 stars, and I think I remember a lot about all of them, but I do remember a lot about Fanon, the book about the Rebels Clinic, because I read it physically. I didn't have the audiobook, and there was just a lot of fascinating information that I didn't know much about. The next book I read was The Hardy Women by Paula Byrne. I listened to the audio on this one, and this is a look at Hardy's life through the women that were in his life, the important women. So we looked at his mom, I think a sister, that part. Why did I not write that part down? Which women we looked at, but there were a couple women that he had relationships with that were, I think, an engagement that had broken off, his first wife and then his second wife. And the author seemed to be looking at how they influenced the different characters in Hardy's novels. And while that's great if you've read Hardy, I have not read Hardy. And I started to get more interested in reading his work as I started this book. There are a lot of spoilers, and I guess that then limits really the audience for which this book is written would be people who have read all of Hardy's work or a lot of Hardy's work, because there were spoilers for all of his main novels that I have not read any of them. So now the good part on that end is that I have a really bad memory for that kind of stuff, brain fog from chronic illness, and just I have read a lot. Even though my reading's down, I've still read a lot of books since I read that book. And I don't know, I have a Hardy novel that I want to get into, and maybe as I start to read it, it'll all come back, whatever it was that I forgot. And like The Rebels Clinic, I felt like this book focused a lot on the beginning of Hardy's life, and then kind of left some gaps in the end of his life. And Like some of the details in the beginning could have been cut down, and in the end could have had more detail. So I ended up giving that 3 stars. Then I read The Scapegoat by Lucy Hughes Hallett. I ended up buying the audiobook on Libro FM because it was new, out, and not all of the libraries bought it. I did have a hold on the audio at one of my libraries, but it was on hold while I read the other ones, and I just don't think that they got it in, like, got access to it. So I ended up buying it on Libro, which I'm glad I did, because I forget how long the audiobook was, but it was 600 plus page book, hard copy, and it did not need to be 600 pages. I'm just telling you that. In my first note, I put 600 plus pages needed a good edit. I just don't know many books that need to be 600 plus pages. Maybe you need to go into a series or break it up a little bit. I don't know. I mean, I do like a chunky novel if all of it is interesting, but if it's not, and you can edit it down, let's try and edit it down. That's just my own thinking about that one. So The Scapegoat, I'm going to make sure I get this right, is the life story of George Villiers, who's the Duke of Buckingham. This is just what you expect. There's a lot of stories about corruption and how the royal family treated other members of their family, and people working against different people in the royal family, trying to get more power, trying to be in favor with the one in power. The Duke of Buckingham was kind of the favored of King Edward, I think. If it's not King Edward, I'll put it right on the bottom who it is. This is probably the book that I remember the least about, although I still have access to it, because once you buy an audiobook on Libro, you have access to it. I don't know that I would ever re-listen to this because it was just too long. It was too long. I did write that it was monarchy at its truest form, and it felt like it was way too detailed. So didn't need that. The Duke of Buckingham was thought to be King Edward's boyfriend. So the author also goes into the impact of that on King Edward's wife, the other people in kind of the inner circle of King Edward and his family. Again, who had favor, who had power. That's where all of that, like just the typical monarchy. I think I gave that 3 stars. That was a generous 3 stars. The last one, is this the last one? Yeah, the last one I read was Vanishing Treasures by Catherine Rundell. This was a look at climate change through the plight of different endangered animals, species. And I am a big animal lover, and I should say this, like The Scapegoat, I do enjoy a good, historical monarchy fiction novel. I just really wasn't interested the way that it was presented and written about. Vanishing Treasures, I do recognize that it's about animals, and I love animals. So each chapter was pretty short, which, love short chapters. And I felt that each chapter was pretty succinct with information about the animal, what makes it on the endangered list, you know, kind of the risks to it. And it's really interesting way to look at climate change. And I highly recommend that through the endangered species, including us. It's a succinct, illuminating narrative of endangered and why, plus ways that we can make changes are at the end. So that for me was just a great way to look at and learn about different aspects of climate change and the effects, and some takeaways. Gotta have some takeaways in books like that. Like, what can we do? What are possibilities for this not to happen? I did give that 5 stars. So Vanishing Treasures and The Siege were probably my favorite. And then I think I would go The Hardy Women. No, I would go The Rebels Clinic, then The Hardy Women, then Byron, and then The Scapegoat were probably how I would, which I think is how I ranked them. That was my first time actually judging for any prize. I had heard about the BookTube Prize from other people who I follow that had judged it before, and it was really easy to sign up. It was easy to, when I got the assignment of what books to read, the system, the way that it's set up, it's all randomized, and it was a good chunk of time to read it. It was about 2 months time, and you read it, you rank it, you send in your final rankings, and then the organizer, Robert, he figures out, he knows how to do all that stuff, and figures out what the next round will be. None of the books that I read won, which the ones that won, I'll link everything below. I'll link the BookTube YouTube channel below. And then you can also go to the website and see the books that won. The books that won, I'm really interested in reading as well, so I may try and get those on audio. The opening for judges is, I think right now as we speak. More of that will be on the website. So if you're interested in judging some of the BookTube Prize nominees, head over there. You don't have to have a BookTube channel in order to be a judge, which is great because there's a lot of people that I've met in the community, in the bookish community, that do communicate through BookTube, but also they don't have a channel, but they still participate in it. So it's really cool. It's a cool way to just read some books out of your comfort zone. I think that was probably the main thing for me. You have the option of fiction or nonfiction, or you can say kind of what your preference is. I did nonfiction because I know that they get a lot of folks that want to read fiction, and I'll read either. So those were 6 nonfiction books I read this year at the beginning of the year, and I am trying to kind of formulate in my mind what my top nonfiction are. Will one of those be on it? I don't know, because like I said, this year's reading has been kind of all over the place, and it is having or causing me to have a hard time to come up with my best of lists. So we'll see. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and you'll find out what those lists are. Probably we'll just do nonfiction and fiction again. I don't know that I've read that much middle grade to break it up and do more than just fiction and nonfiction. We'll see when I look at it, but that's kind of what I'm thinking right now. I hope y'all are doing well. Let me know in the comments below what you're reading this week, and I'll be back with another Vlogmas video tomorrow. Bye.